Hello and welcome to Talkin' Sunday Readings. My name is Tim. I'm joined by Ann Carter and by Pastor Dick Stadler. And we are going to be talking about the readings that you guys might hear in church services this Sunday. And those readings are
A reading from Ezekiel. He said to me, "Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you." As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. He said, "Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I am sending you are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says.' And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are a rebellious people, they will know that a prophet has been among them."
they come from Ezekiel chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 10, and finally, the reading from Gospel of Mark is chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. I'd like to kick off, as I do, with a few questions. Let's see, the reading from Ezekiel. It starts out, God is talking, and he sends a prophet to the people of Israel, and he uses some pretty strong, well, I thought some pretty strong language about the Israelites. And I was wondering what they were up to at this time. What mischief were they getting into that God needed to send them a prophet? What was happening in the kind of in the history of this time that caused this? Caused God's stern reaction?
Well, I can start and then throw in other stuff. If we remember that Ezekiel was both a priest and a prophet, and he was taken with the first exile, and he was there during the time of Jehoiakim, who was also taken into exile. So this is before 586. Before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Right. And so he has got a double audience. He is apparently, the people who were in exile were still being disobedient to God and they're not worshiping him in exile. And so were the people that were left behind in Jerusalem. So he is warning them that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed if you continue to be this disobedient. And all through the prophecy of Ezekiel, he hammers them for their lack of faithfulness to God, both in exile as well as in Jerusalem. But he gives them hope. And he says there is a restoration coming, and a remnant will accept that from God and return. But I think that's useful and helpful. Ann, do you want to throw something else in?
Well, Ezekiel sees God in a different way than others. I mean, Elijah heard the still small voice, and others hear, dreams, etc. But Ezekiel had these huge monsters and God flames and I don't know if that is just Ezekiel's way of expressing this is really serious, guys. And God knows that he's receptive to it, so it comes down like that. I thought it was just so telling. They shall know that there has been a prophet among them. They might not listen to you, but boy, gee willikers, they're going to know I sent you. It's like God's expressing a certain frustration, I think, Tim, that you picked up on that. Mm-hmm. That I have been telling you, I've already started deporting your people, and you still don't believe that anything bad is going to happen.
What a job description to receive from your employer, from God. It's not going to work. You got to still keep preaching to them, talking to them. They're not going to listen. How many people would continue to do what they're doing with that kind of forecast? But he does, and he's faithful, and he also gives some wonderful good news in this prophecy. You got to read the whole thing to past chapter 37 and beyond. But what I find interesting is that when God characterizes these people and warns them who they are, as my translation says in verse 4, the descendants of these people are also impudent and stubborn. I don't know what your translations have, but in Hebrew, it's even more graphic. Literally, it means hard of face and strong of heart. And not strong of heart in a good way, not courageous, but just tough nuts to crack. And so if you've known anybody, maybe you've known someone with a face that's hard, and if you're afraid that if they ever smile, they would all break in pieces like porcelain. That's how they're being described here. And that's not a very appetizing invitation to your ministry. but God is saying, I will speak for you. You're speaking for me. And so I got your back. And now here's what you're going to have to do. And that's basically what he told Isaiah, Jeremiah. And they too did not feel quite ready to accept the prophet role, but they did faithfully, Yeah. Any other questions, Tim?
Well, the other one that I thought that was really interesting, the way he says they might not listen to you, but do it anyway. I just found that really interesting. I think the point you bring up about his faithfulness in executing the task, but it made me, I don't know. I guess it's interesting to me that he would acknowledge that this might not work. Or did he say that more as a test to Ezekiel rather than just? It just struck me as odd that he would say, "Well, this might not work," or am I reading it incorrectly? Is he more saying?
No, I think what he's being is realist to him, and he's not sugarcoating what he's going to be experiencing ahead of time. And I think it's a good reminder to all of us as representatives and witnesses for God, is that you don't change your ministry or your message in order to get people to like you or to go along with you. And I'm afraid the church has done that in some periods of church history drastically. And they've forsaken the word of God, and they've started pandering to people what people wanted to hear. And Paul warns Timothy not to do that. That people have itching ears and they'll want to hear this. And there's a big temptation. Oh man, what I've been telling them just hasn't been working. They don't like it. In this case, God is telling him ahead of time, they're not going to like what you have to say, but be faithful and declare what I tell you. What I found interesting, and I just stumbled across this accidentally, is that in the Bible, the term Son of Man is used throughout the Hebrew Bible, but in Ezekiel, it's used 93 times, and it's used only 14 times in all the rest of the Hebrew Bible. And so God calls him over and over again the same name: Son of Man, do this; Son of Man, say that; Son of Man. When in Ezekiel 37, where he has to speak to the dry bones and so forth, he never calls him by his name. He always calls him Son of Man, and that's sometimes used in the Hebrew Bible to also refer to the Messiah. So we have to read sensitively as who's being addressed and who's being talked about. But most of the time, it's being addressed to him as Son of Man. You're immortal, you're a human, but you've got my power on your back. Yeah, kind of fascinating.
Very interesting. Okay, are we ready to move on then to the epistle reading?
A reading from 2 Corinthians. I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise, and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking to the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of those surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Well, okay. I usually have...
Wait. Before we go on, there is one more thing.
Okay.
The fact that God identifies his people as stubborn and hard of face, but still keeps sending them prophets is an indication of grace. And we can't miss that in all the scriptures where God keeps rebuking his people, keeps sending people, even if the people don't listen. God never gives up on them. This is a testimony and an evidence of his grace, his undeserved love that keeps reaching out to people. He doesn't just reach out to people who listen to him. He reaches out to people who, thumb their nose at God. I think that's an important thing to notice.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's a good reminder. Yeah, I appreciate that. But now, if we move on then to Corinthians, I do sometimes struggle with the epistle lesson. This one, there's a big detail he drops early on that really kind of threw me for a loop, in which he's talking about that he's not going to boast in himself, but he will boast in this man who was taken up to the third heaven. First of all, what is the third heaven? And who is this guy he's talking about? And why is he not telling us all about that guy instead of talking about how he's not going to boast in himself? It struck me as very odd that he brings up this very interesting story, and then he kind of sidesteps that to talk about how boasting and all that stuff. It struck me as very strange. So any insights you guys have I'd very much appreciate.
Well, I think that this is an example of something that is taken a bit out of context, out of the theme of the last couple of chapters, which is the validity of preachers. And there's a lot of boasting going on that so-and-so is better than Paul, and Paul really isn't all that great, et cetera, et cetera. And then Paul talks to this Corinthian congregation, a wealthy congregation, about what's really important. And he talks about this person 14 years ago is caught up to the third heaven. From scholars that I have read, Paul, this is autobiographical. This is Paul talking about himself. This was an experience that he had. Okay. And then he goes on to talk about, if I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, because the things that are of this earth are nothing compared to what I experienced in the third heaven. And I won't even share with you. I can't even express to you in words what I experienced. That's what's important. And you guys are talking amongst yourselves about, the looks, this guy looks good, this guy preaches good, this guy's great. But what I'm telling you is that he says in verse 10, I am content with weakness, insult, hardship, persecution, calamities for the sake of Christ. And that's what's important in preaching, and that's what's important to remember in the church, that we are nothing without him. And all of this that we have around us is fleeting and of no consequence.
Some scholars have suggested that among Jews, there was this belief that the afterlife was in levels. And so the third heaven would be the highest rung. And so he was taken directly into the best representation of paradise, life after death, and to see what was there. And he says it's so mysterious that he's not permitted to tell people here what it's like, because they probably won't catch on anyway. But if you look, I think Paul is a Greek who, speaking Jew, who also thought in Hebrew terms. And there's a parallelism in verse 3 that helps us understand what maybe the third heaven is, because in verse 2, he says, this guy was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body, I don't know, or not. And then he goes on in the next verse to say, this man was caught up into paradise. And so he's identifying paradise together with the third heaven. And that suggests that he's trying to point to, I had a heavenly experience. I was transported somehow in this vision. I don't know if I was actually there or if I just had a vision of it. What's important is that I saw stuff. But because I had this hyperbolic experience, to keep me from bragging about it, which I could easily do, I was given this thorn in the flesh, this messenger of Satan to buffet me, to keep me humble. And we don't know what that thorn in the flesh was. Some have suggested that he had oozing eyes from the time that Jesus appeared to him and flashed and brought him to faith on the way to Damascus. Others have suggested that on his first missionary journey going through Asia Minor, he went through a swampy area and picked up malaria, and that he had recurring bouts of malaria that would just flatten him out, so he couldn't go on with his ministry. There are times when he says in his letters, I'm writing this with large letters, indicating that maybe he had some eye disability caused by maybe the bright light or what, and that he wasn't pleasant to look at. It may have been because his eyes were drizzling from whatever. But he then says he begged God, I can be a much more effective minister if you just take this away, this handicap, because people don't want to listen to me. They don't want to look at me. And God says, no, I'm going to show that when people believe what you preach, it's not because of you and your gifts or your personal appearance. It's because of the power of my word. My grace is what's going to make them change. And I think that's a good reminder to modern pastors, not to rely on their personalities or on their gifts or on their good looks or how well they dress, but rather to remember the powers in the word, be faithful and declare it. And that's what Paul finally says. And as Dan was saying, he glories in his weaknesses then. And he says, come on, bring them on, because the more weaknesses I have and the more impediments I have to work with, the better it's going to advertise that any conversions that happen are because of God, not because of me. And that's a good reminder to all of us when we've got to struggle with obstacles.
The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor, except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. He could not do any miracles there, except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them.
Okay, well, let's keep moving then right on into the Gospel of Mark. This is, I think, a pretty well-known story where Jesus goes to his hometown and people don't believe him. But there's one interesting thing, and maybe it's just the wording in the version I read, but it says that Jesus couldn't do miracles there. and couldn't, I guess, is the word that is kind of the hang up for me. Why couldn't he? And I'm wondering, is it because of their lack of faith that he wasn't able to perform miracles? Is it a weird translation that it should say wouldn't, or something like that? That hung me up. And then at the very end, he sends out his disciples and he tells them not to bring anything. And I'm wondering, why did they not get to bring anything with them except for a staff? So I don't know if you guys want to take it away, one or both, or whichever question you'd like to go for.
Go ahead, Ann, you start and I'll chime in.
Okay, mop it up. There seems to be some sort of a correlation between faith and miracles. The last story we had was Jairus's daughter, and then the woman who had been bleeding, and Jesus says, "Go, your faith has made you well." He says that several times. Go, your faith has made you well. Somehow I believe it's going to happen, and therefore it does. It's not that Jesus doesn't have the power to do it. It's somehow we have to be willing to receive it. And they were as unbelieving. We'll go back to Ezekiel. In verse 6, he was amazed at their unbelief. They're as unbelieving as the people that were going into exile soon. And they wouldn't accept it. They said, he's just a Nazareth. He's a boy from Nazareth. We know his family, and he's not worth anything. And he can't do this, so we're not going to give him the time of day.
Yeah.
That's my take on it, because there are too many other times where people, that's been the response, is you believed it and it happened to you. And this seems to support that.
And I think to reinforce that, there are 3 or 4 terms that are used for miracles in the New Testament. The one that is used here means powers, but the more common one that I like is the one that means signs. And so it was a miracle was a sign that God was active in his world and that he had sent the person who is speaking. And that's what the sign was supposed to do. If these people are full of unbelief and they're just resistant to believing this, then of course you could say he can't do miracles among them, because they wouldn't even accept that as a sign, because they're so unbelieving. And so it's kind of like not wasting the goodness of the signs. So that still has a defect in it, because obviously God has the power to do anything. And so he could have done miracles there if he wanted to, but that may be a mysterious thing that we're going to have to wait until Judgment Day to talk to Jesus about and say, now, exactly why couldn't you do that? I don't get it, and maybe that is there to mystify us, so that we, in humility, we don't say, I got the ministry of Jesus all figured out. I can explain everything that he does. And in humility say, I'm not so sure I can get my mind around that, how the all-powerful God could not do miracles just because of their unbelief. That doesn't sound like a good enough excuse to me. And so I think we have to learn some humility. But what is interesting in this text too is that we get the names of the brothers of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church believes that Mary was a perpetual virgin, that she had no other children. And so these would have to be, if that is true, and that's church tradition, then these have to be brothers who were born in Joseph's first family, and he's now married to Mary. But we don't get the names of any sisters. We're told he has sisters, but we're not told how many, and we're not told what their names were. But what's interesting is, of these 4 names, Joseph, Judas, Simon, there are 2 of them that are James is first. James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. 2 of them have written books in the New Testament. And we're told that during the ministry of Jesus, they were not believers in him. It's after his resurrection that suddenly Jesus appears to James on Easter and shows himself to him. And he becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And then Jude becomes a writer of the little book that we have in the New Testament, Jude. So it's just kind of a neat little side detail that people can notice. Here we learn something about the family of Jesus and who they were. Yeah. At the end of this text, do you have another question about why you shake off your dust?
Well, yeah, I mean, my question at the end, so Jesus sends them all out, but he tells them not to bring anything with them except for a staff. And he says that if they don't accept you, you should kick the dust off your feet and you know, be gone with them, kind of thing. But I'm wondering, why weren't they allowed to bring anything? And I guess also, yeah, is there significance to the dust off of his feet? Is that a common I don't know, metaphor that was used then, or anything like that?
Well, let's start with, I'll start with the dust, and then Anne may want to add some other thoughts. But this is not the only time it's used in the New Testament. When Jesus sends out the 72 in Luke 9:4, we're also told that he instructs them, if they will not receive you, then shake the dust off as a testimony. We've been here. You are without excuse on Judgment Day, because you'll never be able to say, I never heard it. I never had a chance to believe in Jesus, because the dust will be there as a witness. And Paul does the same thing in Acts 13:51 in Antioch, his first place on his missionary journey, where he knocks the dust off his feet and he says, you don't want to believe us? Fine. But here, this is the evidence that we were here and you are without excuse. Okay. And so it was a way of simply letting people know that they're making a big mistake by not listening and believing what they're telling them, because they're telling them the truth. Yeah. Anything else that you want to throw in there, Ann?
No, not necessarily.
Why didn't they take anything?
Yeah, there's certain cultural colloquialisms like that. I think that everybody would just know what it meant. I think. I don't have any proof of that. Why didn't they take any money? I think it was, as you said, was it a test? I think maybe it was. And I think it was also proof that I'm going to take care of all of your needs. But it was also to develop a relationship between, there weren't hotels, but say there were. If you come into town and you stay at a hotel, you're separate from the community. This time when you come in, you got nothing, and people offer hospitality to you when you go in and you're in their homes. This time he says don't. Next time he says take, and take a staff and take and be prepared. But this first time, you're going out. I'm sending you out like babes in the woods, and I'm going to take care of you.
And when we've talked about this before in other contexts, hospitality was an absolute characteristic of that ancient culture. And you could count on people providing you a shelter and even food. And so what he's doing is giving people a chance to practice their hospitality to his representatives. And in response, he's given them authority to cast out demons and to heal people. And so now they have the ability to do the healing and to relieve people. So there's going to be a kind of a give and take here. If people are hospitable and welcome them and feed them and so forth, there's going to be some benefits that are going to come to their community. But even though the earlier part of the text says he was not able himself to do miracles in Nazareth, he authorizes and gives power to his disciples to do healing miracles. And the interesting thing is sequence, because when you look at what they're supposed to do first, they go out and they preach repentance first. Then they do the authenticating signs that they have been sent by God, and they heal people and cast out demons. So their primary function was to preach, not to do miracles. And then the miracles were reinforcing that what they had to say was really from God. And I think that's a good reminder today to faith healers, to make sure that if you do believe you've got a gift of doing miracles, make sure that you're preaching repentance first and foremost to people, because that's what's going to save them.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, very good. There are no other last thoughts. Then I will we'll close us out here and say thank you very much for watching. Thank you for joining us this week. We always appreciate. And if you have any feedback, if you have any questions of your own, add a comment or let us know. Like the video, comment, share, all that stuff. And thank you guys very much for joining us. And we'll see you next week.